The city of St. Paul, Minnesota, under a local state of emergency after being targeted by a cyber attack. St. Paul's mayor says hackers breached the city's internet-based information system last week. That prompted city services to unplug from the internet. City services are slowly coming back online, but officials have not indicated if they know who is behind this. The FBI, the Minnesota National Guard, they work to help contain the breach.
I think I saw some people misinterpret we had the National Guard out there in an armed capacity. That's not it. These are cyber experts. These are security experts that work for the National Guard.
I'm joined now by Lieutenant Colonel Brian Morgan, the Director of Cyber Coordination for the Army National Guard. Sir, thank you for being with me. Let's just start with, and I go into this interview knowing there's some things you just can't tell me because of security. There's some things you're not going to answer, but we get as far as we can. Scope and scale. Sure. Help us understand the breadth and the severity of the hack.
Sure. So what I can say is that the scope and scale of the incident were sufficient enough to warrant summoning the National Guard, which means it is truly an emergency. The services that the city relies on largely depend on access to the internet or external entities accessing the city's internet. So when they shut that internet down as a precaution to make sure that the attacker couldn't keep maneuvering within their network, all those services got disconnected. So in terms of scope and scale, anything that relied on that city's internet has been impacted. And some of those were fairly important. If you want to go to the library and use internet, well, that could be a challenge for you. Some people don't have internet at their home. So, critical is, I guess, from a frame of reference, but fire, 911, those absolutely life critical services, those are still operating as needed.
So the hack was discovered a little more than a week ago. Is it clear how long the attackers were in the system?
Yeah, so, by the time we were activated, they found the initial entry a few days prior. So what happened was, they discovered the malicious activity, and then they immediately shut down the VPN connection, knowing that this was, a significant event. And at that point, during the discovery process, realized this wasn't an accident, this wasn't a misconfiguration, this was a legitimate attack by a threat actor somewhere in the world on their network. And then that sort of scaled it up to when the FBI gets called in, other state partners get called in, and then eventually, once they realized the recovery effort would take more than their internal capacity to handle, that's when they called the National Guard to assist them with the recovery.
And so Governor Walz made it clear that y'all aren't standing around with semi-automatic rifles. That's not your role here. What is the National Guard doing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, typically when we respond to emergencies in most states, they don't think of us as akin to responding to cyber events. They know us for flood. They know us for fire, they know us for civil disturbance, search and rescue, et cetera. But the Guard, when it responds for a cyber capacity, what we really provide are our experience sets and skills. So a National Guard soldier typically works in the community where they serve. So the majority of the responders for this mission actually come from the St. Paul Twin Cities area, working for large companies. Some work for the government as well. And what they bring to the fight, which is unique, is there's an operational mindset. There's a surge capacity and coordination experience, which is kind of unparalleled because we kind of do these sorts of things all the time, whether it's, on state active duty or federal service. So we're pretty familiar with the emergency situation mindset. As well, they bring a set of skills and capabilities, which are pretty comprehensive because not in addition to their civilian experience they get from their employers over years of service to them, they also get unique military training, which is pretty darn good, if I might say. And that's all across the country and even in the world. So I think that's the main differentiator we bring.
City officials extended this local state of emergency for another 90 days. What's impacted now, and how long do you think it'll take to get back to normal?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, the main things that are impacted now are obviously everything I mentioned earlier with external services touching the city. Some of your ability to process payroll, automated, those kind of things. They reverted using what's called their business continuity plan. They reverted back to more manual processes to ensure that vendors get paid, to ensure their employees get paid. And so there's a lot of work to do to recover the network. And in terms of timeline, It really depends because, it's a hard thing to nail down. These networks, when you have a city like the size of St. Paul, they're very complex. There's many different servers. There's thousands of endpoints, and the attacker could have planted what are known as hooks anywhere in the network. So it really is a delicate process to go through, and you don't want to turn that internet back on until you know that the environment is safe. Because if you are premature in that, the attacker could come right back in, and then you're back at zero. So, it's one of these things where the timeline we expect to be as long as it takes. And I wish I had more detail for you, but that's kind of how these things go.
All right, Lieutenant Colonel Brian Morgan, thank you so much for your time, and I'm sure the people of St. Paul are very grateful for the work you are doing. Enjoy the Saturday.
Thank you.